Watch me make a defense of states from an anarchist perspective. Are you guys ready? And so in response to Temer's comment, which is this one right here, okay? Ethnic nationalism through statehood ties blood with soil too much, in my honest opinion, leads to blood ethnic conflict and acquiring more soil for your kin, etc. And that's true. I agree with that. But I do believe that if not ethnic nationalism, at least the whole concept of statehood can be good in some cases, especially when it comes to defending the human rights of certain peoples in general. So to take an example of with Palestine, right? I do believe that a Palestinian state can be necessary to protect their rights, their human rights from Israel. If Israel wasn't so much of a state for Jews as it was conceived of, maybe there could be a way in which everybody could coexist within Israel, but it was designed to be a state for Jewish people. So as soon as you're not Jewish, then even though you can get your citizenship or whatever privileges, it will always remain a state for Jewish people. Now, to defend states, maybe more in a way that to me speaks more to me, at least. I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about Quebec. French Canadians, can you believe it? I'm French Canadian. And a part of our history that we are often taught and that maybe not a lot of people know about is that people who spoke French in Canada, French Canadians, were seen as an inferior race. When we spoke French, we were told, speak white. Our nationalist organization, which was a Marxist organization, very leftist, was called Le Front de Libération du Québec, FLQ, the Quebec's Liberation Front. They saw it not only as a way to gain our own state, but as a way to stop what they perceived as British, Canadian, American colonialism within Quebec's borders. And they wanted to make Quebec a country. And one of the reasons why they were Marxists and their own perspective on that was that in the 1960s, believe it or not, the wealth gap between French and English Canadians was a larger wealth gap than in the 60s between Black and white Americans. Black and white Americans, economically, not in terms of rights, not in terms of civil representation and all that, but in terms of income, the inequality between white and Black Americans was smaller than the inequality between French-speaking and English-speaking Canadians. Because English-speaking Canadians were the industrialists. You want a source? I'm going to have to find it. Hold on. Yeah, no, I got it. Don't worry. It's good to ask for sources, maybe an anarchist. Don't worry about it. Okay. There you go. So the Laurando-Dunton Commission on bilingualism and biculturalism estimated in 1960 that in Quebec, the average revenue for a job of French men who were unilingual in Quebec was 51% of English men who were also unilingual. At the same date, so in 1960, in the United States, the average Black man's revenue was 56% of the average white man's revenue. I was doing the translation at the same time. I'm sorry. French Canadian men made 51% of the income of English Canadian men. 56% of Black men made 56% of white men's revenue. Was there a study of bilingual people? But that's the thing. Bilingual people, I'm not sure. But the thing is, when you're bilingual, first you already come from a higher, like especially at that time in 1960, to speak both languages, you needed good education, and it also doesn't mean from which if you're actually French or if you're actually English. Most French people in 1960, when the scholarity was really, really low. Actually, schools in 1960 were still, controlled by the church, by religion, you didn't learn much English in there, maybe some words. But yeah, speaking English or learning English would allow you to get up to gain more revenue, to actually get closer to the bourgeoisie or the English aristocracy. I mean, that's the same thing in every colonial country, right? If you start speaking the language of the colonial power, you'll start becoming, you'll have better chances of gaining power yourself. Yeah, minority groups often seek statehood to prevent majority group domination. And that's the thing. That's where I was going with this, is that there was this one guy, this one Marxist, one of the guys who was part of the Quebec Liberation Front, who fought with the Black Panthers, was jailed in New York for protesting. He wrote a whole sociological essay on, he called it White N-Words of America, and he was talking about Quebec people. Now, the comparison is not that great, because though Quebecers weren't considered white, they weren't a visible minority, which makes it so if you speak English, well, it's a lot easier. And being the chances of becoming white with time were a lot higher than Black people's chances of becoming white with time, because race is a social construct. But one of the ways that Quebec was able to reduce the wealth discrepancies between English and French people was that in the 1960s, when I showed you the stats, that was in 1960s, there was something called the Quiet Revolution, where Quebec actually, or like at least French Quebecers, took over the government through elections, but was able to use it as a tool to emancipate French Canadians. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many laws today that force people pretty much to speak French in their workplaces, to not give an edge on English people. There's laws in which every single business needs to offer services in French, again, to not discriminate against French people, as we have been historically by English people. But all that to say, the state was a great way to empower a segment of the population which used to be extremely disempowered. To put a caveat, I'm an anarchist. I'm against states. I think in this case, a state can be beneficial in terms of protecting, it's interesting to say, but majority rights in a context where a minority is ruling, either ethnically, linguistically, culturally, whatever. But that being said, the only reason why the state is important in that context is because of capitalism, because of structures that already enable domination and oppression. If those weren't there, states wouldn't be important. It's the same reason why, I'm against legislation, because, I'm against states. But I do believe that legislation is really important today in terms of, labor legislation and security and safety at work legislation, things like that. I think those are important, even though I'm against a state or against states.